AskReddit. Deep sea fishermen, ocean freighter workers, naval personnel, etc. What is the strangest, creepiest thing you have seen out on the job? Part 2. A friend of mine, known as Damo, was an avid fisherman, and he and his dad used to go out on the sea fishing whenever they could. A few years ago, he told me this story and it really creeped me out, so this seems like an appropriate place to tell it. Damo and his dad were on the second night of a trip deep sea fishing, and they decided to get some sleep in the early evening so they could go for whatever fish they were after at around 1 a.m. The best time to get this fish, apparently. Anyway, they only had a smallish boat, but the weather was extremely pleasant and the sea was calm to the point of stillness, so they figured it would be a great night's fishing for them. Around 12:30 a.m. they started to set their gear up, and as they were on the starboard side and getting bait ready, they heard a loud splash on the port side. As there was almost no swell, they figured it was either a large fish or some gear had somehow fallen in, so they went over to have a look. Floating face up in the water, only a few feet from the side of the boat, was a young woman. They reckoned she couldn't have been more than about 30 at most. She showed absolutely no signs of decomposition, bloating, and there was nothing tangled in her hair, all of which would normally suggest she'd been in the water for some time. She was wearing a simple white skirt and a blue-colored strappy top, both of which were clean and apparently looking barely wet, again, all indicating she had only just gone in the water. She showed no signs of damage, like having been beaten or attacked, and her eyes and mouth were shut. Damo said she looked totally peaceful and like she was simply asleep and just floating on her back in the water. They were both totally freaked out by the whole thing, but reacting more to the need to make sure she was okay, instead of just standing there trying to work out where she came from. They tried to wake her up, shouting to her, etc., and they threw a line to her, hoping they may catch her enough to pull her in. She showed no signs of movement, and the splashing around that they were making with the rope served only to let her body drift further away from the boat. When she was a few meters away, Damo ran off to grab a fishing rod, hoping they could pull her in that way, and his dad ran to the cabin to try and call a Coast Guard for help. When Damo got back to the side, she had vanished. He frantically searched around and splashed into the water with the rod, thinking she had bobbed underwater or even drifted under the boat somehow, but the body had vanished. Eventually, his dad, figuring they just couldn't leave a potential dead, unconscious body floating in the water, jumped in and swam over to where she had last been, hoping he may find her under the surface, but they couldn't find anything. They did eventually drive the boat around in a good half-kilometer circle, but they never saw the body again. The Coast Guard did come out, and obviously Damo and his dad were kind of interrogated to make sure they hadn't dumped the body, but nothing came of it at all. The freakiest thing about it all was that the boat was thoroughly checked before they had set out fishing the day before, so they could say with certainty that there had been no woman on board when they set off, either a dead body or a stowaway homeless woman. The apparently fresh state of the body kind of removed the possibility that she had been in the water a while, and that they just found the body and they were far enough out from land and nowhere near any other boats that her appearance there was just totally unexplainable, as was the way the body just disappeared. Damo and his dad hadn't been gone for more than 20 seconds from the side of the boat, but in that time the body just vanished. They were both really shaken by the whole thing and were most terrified by the fact that her appearance was preceded by the heavy splash in the water, to them suggesting the body had only just entered the water from their own boat. They tell the story now as a kind of "you won't believe what happened to us once" type thing, but it shook them badly, and neither has been back to the same fishing spot since. Some deep-sea fish have lures attached to their bodies to attract prey. Maybe this was some man-eating fish monster with a woman-shaped lure meant to catch unsuspecting fishermen. Pretty creepy. My dad spent years at sea and has many stories from his time on tanker ships as an engineer. One time the ship was being slowed down by something they couldn't explain. Mechanically fine, turns out they had a large dead whale wrapped around the bow of the ship slowing them down. But the creepiest story was a simple one. The crew was shark fishing off the bank of a smaller tanker ship. basically attaching meat chunks to hooks and throwing them off the back to trawl in the ocean, Southeast Asia, Australia area. My dad, for fun, made up this large steel alloy, described it as being incredibly durable hook to use. They attach a large chunk of meat to it and throw it off the back. A while later, they haul it back in, only to find the meat is gone and the hook is bent completely straight. There was nothing it could have snagged on in the deep ocean as the boat was driving through. My dad and the crew were sufficiently unnerved to think that something large down there could have bent a large hook like that. There is always a bigger fish. I was in the Royal Navy and was at sea during Hurricane Andrew. Was the most exciting thing ever. Waves were so big they went over the bridge wings. Awesome stuff. Remember seeing gulls trying to stay in the air and going down behind the waves out of sight. They were that large. It was too rough to feel seasick. I just snuck out onto the bridge and pretended I was on watch and just watched in awe. I was on the USS Clark, a FFG, not a NJR OTC field trip in high school. Got stuck in a nor'easter. On the bridge when all sorts of alarms go off for collision warning. Captain looked at my buddy and I and said we better grab onto something as a rouge wave is coming. Found out that these boats are made to go through waves, not over. It was fun looking out behind the ship as we exited from under the estimated 75-foot rouge wave. While in the Navy, I was an engineer who worked in one of our ship's 2 engine rooms. I was tasked with cleaning out tubes inside a heat exchanger that took in seawater to condense steam. The entire tube system and the end cap was filled to the brim with mud and some sort of sea worms. It looked like it was one giant living brown mass, and I immediately threw up upon smelling and seeing it. We were in the Persian Gulf, and the water was relatively shallow and warm, so lots of creepy crawlies in our seawater pumps and heat exchangers. Reminds me of when my dad was cleaning out a heating duct in the brewery he works at, one of the few macro breweries. He could see that there was a big mass of something. He thought it was dirt or dust. Reached in to scoop it out. It was a load of live cockroaches. The mass hit the floor and scattered. Some crawled into his overalls. It was nasty. So if I had to do what you did, I'd think of the story my dad told me and I'd get right out of there. Former submarine sonar man here. No windows. So it falls outside the creepy things I've seen requisite. More of a creepy thing we heard. I was stationed on the West Coast. Whenever we would transit near a particular Californian city within a specific area, we would hear over the headphones the something that started off sounding like a woman screaming and ended sounding like bullfrogs on a hot summer night. None of the sonar techs up through our chief knew what to make of it. We chalked it up to just being a merfrog and carried on. I'm an officer in the Australian Merchant Navy. The creepiest thing for me is on a daily basis, I have to go into the bosun store, where all the tools and equipment are kept, where a guy I sailed with hanged himself. I was on study leave when he did it, and I had seen him a few months prior and he was all smiles. His wife had decided to leave him and take the kids. A friend of his was killed on the job some years ago by accident, and he blamed himself, which he had no control over. It was largely to do with bad luck and a safety procedure when working with a crane. This guy who I liked hanged himself, and every time I go into the bosun store, I remember him and feel weird, creeped out. Not the strangest on here, but here is my tuppence worth. Last October, I was on a survey vessel between the Shetland Islands and the Faroe Islands. The sea was like a mirror, unusual for the Atlantic, and a thick fog had surrounded us for days. We were collecting core samples from the sea floor, and I was working nights. Out of nowhere, thousands of tiny birds appeared out of the fog. Some settled on the boat, all silent. Others flew clockwise around the boat, darting in and out of the fog. This continued for a few hours until around 4 a.m. The birds just started dropping dead out of the sky. Thump, and a tiny fragile dead bird next to me. This continued until daybreak when the fog finally lifted, and the birds disappeared along with it. We were finding the bodies for days afterwards. This happened about 6 months ago. Bit of background. I've grown up on boats and beaches. Family have always had a boat, and I have always fished. However, this story didn't happen when I was out in the ocean. I was at a friend's house, just after the moon had risen. It was a fairly bright night as I was sitting with a group of friends on a beach house deck. Anyway, none of us had actually taken any drugs or started drinking yet. We had just gotten back to the house. I remember looking out at the view of the beach and the moon. The bright moon was shining a fairly wide path from just below it across the water and onto the beach, but all the other water was dark. You can imagine it like this, although you could see the occasional wave break as the whitewash caught some light. Anyway, I noticed a red light going from left to right. This is strange because a starboard green light should have been showing on that side of any boat, at a cracking pace. Like, it looked like some serious type of speedboat flying. I pointed this out to my friends, and a few of us noted how quick and smooth this boat was flying across the bay. It eventually moved near the light of the moon, and as we all watched it fly past, it was literally just a red light, like a giant red ball. As soon as it hit the other side of the moonlight, it disappeared. I kind of assumed it was a drone, but it was seriously quick. It disappeared and was a long way out of skimming what looked very close to the water on a surf beach. Former commercial fisherman here. The number of sharks circling oil rigs is pretty harrowing. Mostly hammerheads, but the sheer volume makes you plant your feet. My uncle used to work on those rigs and said they would fish off of them for shark and bring them up in baskets and kill and grill them all the time. The father of a friend of mine used to work on a boat, and he told me they once had a ball of lightning dancing around on deck. Before he told me about that, I never even knew such a thing existed or it could happen. So I used to deep sea fish a lot. I've seen all sorts of big fish, but the constant that you always see is the barracuda. Barracuda are great predators. They move at lightning fast speed, and their teeth cut so clean and fast they can take your finger and you won't notice until there's blood all over the boat. Anyways, barracuda love deep sea fishermen. Fishermen give them an easy meal of a tired fish who is too weak to get away. I feel sorry for the boat that gets stuck over a school of barracuda. They'll wait until your fish is just in sight range and boom, you'll reel up nothing more than a fish head. You see a large shadow, longer than you, slowly fade into deep water with your dinner in his belly. It's not the strangest thing, but it scares new fishermen to feel nothing but a gentle tug and then just reel up the fish head.